Hello again. This treatise is titled Master of History and Science. The previous lecture, titled Master of Inquiry, is actually, I said in that video, Master of History, but it's actually supposed to be titled Master of Inquiry. This video is rightly titled, as well as the other one. This video is called Master of History and Science. I start off with a brief introduction, and then I go on. I write about 2 pages on science, and then we delve right into history. And that will be the majority of this video, will be history. I start off by saying that in the very recent times, humanity has learned a vast amount about the universe, the past, and itself. Since the 19th century, it has unearthed thousands of years of history, forgotten or wholly unknown beforehand. The history of the great pre-classical civilizations, and before that the history of the genus Homo evolution, the histories of Earth, the solar system, our galaxy, and the universe, being treated separate as an abstraction. Since the beginning of the 20th century, it has made hitherto inconceivable discoveries about the physical universe at the smallest and largest scales, both micro and macro. We can so far reach from quantum theory to cosmology, the origins of life. 0.5 billion years of Earth's history before the existence of rock formation, and the origins of space-time, etc. And just in the past few decades, it has been able to look inside the brain to begin finer-grained mapping of its structures and to observe them actually at work. These advances have been enormous, exhilarating, and consequential. We occupy a different and much richer thought world concerning the zeitgeist, or time spirit, universe than our forebears living at as recently as the 19th century. The fact attending to these developments, whereas it once was believed that every advance in knowledge diminishes our ignorance, these recent giant strides in knowledge have shown us just how little that we actually know. Inquiry, or history, thus generates a paradox. Increasing knowledge increases ignorance. So, what do we know? And what do we now know that we do not know? And what have we learned about the nature of inquiry itself? The struggles and difficulties that have to be taken into account and overcome as our increasing knowledge increases our ignorance. 3 answers shall be proposed quite nicely. We have a brief little treatise on history in this section. On science. We have a brief history of science in this section. And then we dive right into history, being the driving force, and then as well as psychology, but I have an entire playlist on psychology, so that's where we will discover the mind. So we will cover in the science section like fundamental physics and cosmology, discovery of the pre-classical past and human evolution, in the historical section, and then in the psychological section, the new neurosciences of the mind of the brain. So, in plain sober truth, without overstatement, science is humanity's greatest intellectual achievement. Science is a capacious term, but clear enough. Most people get some elementary physics, chemistry, and biology at secondary and post-secondary schools and colleges. The less familiar and far deeper are the parts and combinations of these broad domains and their subject matters, which range from inquiry into the fundamental elements of physical reality, through the complexities of life to the furthest reaches of the cosmos. Yet it is still the case that the great majority of our overpopulated species on our planet know little about what the sciences have so far revealed, and they, broadly speaking, adhere to a picture of the world, or a thought world, or a time spirit, or a zeitgeist, similar in many respects to the one that had been dominant before the scientific revolution of the 16th and 17th centuries. That worldview or mindset of a deity-created universe centered upon mankind physically and morally was functionally dominant then, but although it is still the majority belief, it has become functionally marginal, for in almost all practical respects, the world runs on science and technology, not religion. Given the overwhelming success of science, it is remarkable that even as it progresses with such giant strides, it should at the same time more vividly exemplify the paradox of knowledge, that every gain in knowledge multiplies the sense of our ignorance. In applied science, the horizon of competence in controlling aspects of the world has advanced beyond the imagination of previous generations. For example, the biological and medical sciences, but also the physical and cosmological sciences. One might have a more robust comprehension of science if one first understands prehistoric technologies before ancient science, medieval science, and modern science. Now we go back to history, and this entire section from here on out will be about history. Back to history, human evolutionary history, which is prehistory. The knowledge they had is knowledge how, that is practical knowledge, from making tools like the Australopithecine to building shelters. The human mind was never meant to completely comprehend millions or billions of years. But mastering fire, creating art, domesticating plants and animals, shaping huge stones, moving huge stones, digging irrigation canals, fashioning textiles and pottery, casting bronze from copper and tin, smelting iron, and so slowly onwards to the advanced technologies of the 21st century. Knowledge how almost certainly came to be accompanied at an early point by efforts to achieve knowledge what, that is, theoretical knowledge, explanations, right, wrong, of why the how works. The first record we have of a person relying on observation and reason alone, not on myths, legends, or imagination, was Thales of Miletus, the first philosopher. Observation and reason require a context of inquiry, an accumulation of results corrected by tests or experiments. For whereas technology, knowledge how, had been in development for millions of years, science, knowledge what, began at that moment. In Ionia of the Greek world of classical antiquity, from the 6th century BCE onward. Until very recently in human history, knowledge how has been far in advance of knowledge what, and the effort to provide the latter has rested chiefly on imagination, fancy, fear, or wishful thinking. Certainty outside of mathematics and logic is unattainable, so we have to accept that the best we can achieve so far as a species is highly credible and well-supported belief. These beliefs, powerfully supported by our best evidence in science, can turn out to be wrong. Until the 19th century, history, in the sense of a past known about with some degree of reliability, stretched back less than 3,000 years, to a period somewhat approximately and patchily remembered in the Hebrew Bible and in the archaic period of Greece. Herodotus, although alluding to Men, the fertility god of Egypt, as that country's first king, begins his account of Egyptian history with a pharaoh he calls Sesostris, a name shared by several pharaohs, none of whom did what Herodotus says his Sesostris did, and who is probably a composite of several pharaohs dating from Egypt's 19th dynasty in the 12th century BCE. Most of what Herodotus learned from priests and scribes during his visit to Egypt is mixed with legend and filled with references designed for a Greek audience, and he gives no dates, but he knows of the great monuments and compares them in Egypt's cities to Nineveh and Babylon. The Hellenization of Egypt after the conquest of Alexander the Great and its subsequent inclusion in the Roman Empire hastened the dimming of historical interest and memory, so that the Greek and Latin authors who wrote about it knew little more than Herodotus did. A parallel loss of influence by Persia and the states of Mesopotamia has a similar effect. Greek historians remembered Xerxes and before him Darius and Cyrus because of their cultural struggle for survival against the then mighty Persian Empire, just as the editors of the Torah remembered King Nebuchadnezzar because he took their leaders into exile in Babylon. The Torah speaks of Pharaonic Egypt, Babylon, Nineveh, Kish, and Ur of the Chaldees, where Abraham was born, because relative to its own authors' patch of the Levant, these were mighty places of note. But other than that, until recently, then, Relatively secure history, as viewed from Europe, extended back only as far as the first half of the first millennium BCE, say not much before 750 BCE, and what was known of it and even more of the periods preceding it was only hazily remembered. The beginning of globalization in the early modern period, CE, brought the monuments of Egypt and the traditions of other peoples and places, not least China, into focus from the Eurocentric perspective. In the records of the grand historian Shiji of Sima Tan and Sima Qian, written in the late 2nd and early 1st centuries BCE, the history of China putatively reaches back to the Yellow Emperor in the mid-3rd millennium BCE. Through the Doubting Antiquity school of historians in China in the 1920s, argued that the Yellow Emperor was a legendary figure, only that anything before the Shang period of the 2nd millennium has to be ascribed to myth. China's earliest written records date from the reign of King Wu Ding, said to be the 21st king of the Shang dynasty in the mid-13th century BCE, but that anything before the spring and autumn period, 770 to 475 BCE, was mainly superstitious. What was known about origins was indeed generally supplied by myth everywhere, and in the European and Near Eastern case, the monuments surviving from much earlier times into the classical period served chiefly as hooks upon which the myths and legends could be hung. Thus it was that the history of times before the composition of the Homeric poems and the Pentateuch of the Hebrew Bible, both occurring roughly between the 9th and 7th centuries BCE, was only impressionistically known until very recently indeed. In fact, until the 19th century CE. And so that is a little part about science and history, and how for the great majority of time that we have lived, most of the ancients that lived before Herodotus and even after Herodotus in the 6th century BCE knew relatively little about the times that had gone before. And it was only really, and from the time really until the 19th century, that most people did not have a very strong understanding of history at all. Most history was very limited, and literacy until the 18th century Enlightenment was extremely low as well. Most people, if they could speak and talk, which they could, it was very limited, and most people could not write. So we really need to keep these things in mind when we're thinking about the world. I will do another video on another topic, namely literacy and the history of literacy and how has it evolved since ancient times until now. And I will do that in a separate video. But I hope that this video has been somewhat informative. I hope you might have learned a little bit about science, the importance of science, and a little bit about the importance of history, and how for a long time in human history, most history was not known, and most science evolved relatively slow. It is only until about the 19th century that, and after the Enlightenment and the following industrial revolutions and the mechanical revolution that issued from the scientific revolution, it is only until that time that we actually start to see a very, very fast-paced progression of actual history and of actual science. But I do not mean to belittle the history done by ancient historians or medieval historians. It was just very limited in its content. I do not mean to belittle ancient science either, because some of our greatest strides were made in prehistorical and ancient times. I do thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video. Thank you.